All right, we got a special treat for us tonight. We got an off-road racing legend and a good friend of mine, and another shock guy, probably a better shock guy than me if I talk about it. Curt, thanks for joining us tonight. Wanted to talk about just off-road racing in general, but eventually I'd like to get to some of the ways that you communicate and or figure out how somebody who is driving needs what they need. Like if somebody tells you it's too harsh or too soft or it's rebounding improperly, how do you communicate that to somebody? But first, tell me a little bit about your background. And I know there's a lot of it, so how did you get started in off-road racing?
Well, you know, it's great to be here, Wayne. You know, be at my age and still be involved with the sport and at King of the Hammers and, you know, do media events and do a lot of testing with Brad. And so it's just, to me, that's a gift, you know, that I didn't think I'd ever get. But anyway, so, you know, a lot of the history of the sport, you know, evolved, you know, from the great Mickey Thompson with some of his creativity, and some of it, you know, evolved through the Herps, and some of it through me and through John Marking, and of course King, Custer. I mean, the history is just amazing. And we're all just trying to go faster. And so I got, you know, started in off-roading back in Massachusetts because I had you know, my friends had Jeeps and they wanted to race, and we built roll cages and roll bars and grew it, and I used racing to grow my business. I signed up dealers wherever we went, up and down the East Coast into Canada. And, you know, there's a lot of creativity in our sport. It's not monkey see, monkey do like in some motorsports. So I really was drawn to it. And, you know, I'm just an average C student, you know, with a high school diploma, but I'm an Imagineer. You know, if the motor goes here and the seat goes there, everything else falls into place. I'm not an engineer, and but I built some great race cars, and 58 since I lived in California, since the 80s. That's a good number. And then something like 24 cars, all four-wheel drives back east, you know, to race short course in Crandon. And, you know, my history was I would drive 1,000 miles from my shop with a van with an open trailer to Crandon, race, win, drive 2,000 miles from Crandon to Riverside, California, and became friends with Walker and used his shop and serviced the car, and went out to Riverside, raced, won, and then drove 3,000 miles home. No credit card, no cell phones, and
Yeah,
I mean, it was great. I loved it.
that's an adventure, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we blew motors up, and we pulled heads off in Salt Lake City and did a valve job and whatever. But it was just like I was determined to come out and see the big guys race at their big short course race.
Wow. So I'm sitting here, and they tell you never to meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed. But if anybody's ever met Curt, you're never disappointed. And I just want to say how much it is a pleasure it is to be able to call you a friend, because you've been one of my racing off-road heroes forever. And I remember a time where we were over on the lake bed. I was over by the bridge, and I was tuning some guys, and somebody that wasn't part of our group comes in and comes ripping through, and I walk up to the window as you come around, and I couldn't believe it was you sitting in the seat, and I said, "Hey, Curt, what are you doing?" He's like, "Well, we wanted to see what you're doing here, and that's all square edge. I would never tune in there." And I remember coming down, and you were working with another shock company, and I asked you, you know, what can I help? And we went for a ride, and I went for a ride with, I think, Alan, if I recall. I don't remember his last name, but I think Alan in a single shock rear Jeep, and I came back and said, I believe it's probably cavitating. And the biggest compliment I ever got was Curt came to me a couple days later and said, "Hey, Mr. Shock Guy." I don't even think you knew my name then.
No.
And he said, "Hey, Mr. Shock Guy, I think you were right." So that was a story I had. Thing came to mind. You were here the other day, and you were working on some shocks for your own, and I heard you saying that you made the first ever bypass shock. And I will 100% give you credit. I don't know any different. You made the first off-road bypass shock.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, you know, because I lived in Massachusetts, I couldn't send my shocks. Back then you had rough country B Mark 5s with remote reservoirs. And, you know, I couldn't send them back to be serviced. So I had to figure out how to set them up, take them apart and set them up and change them and change oil and divider pistons. I had to learn all that. Where here you could send, you know, in California you could just send it back. Well, so when I finally moved out west in my 30s, I had, you know, a great four-wheel drive shop, but I decided I just wanted a challenge in my life. I wanted to come win the Baja 1000, and my wife and my 3 kids, and you know, Todd, Kyle, and Valerie, they all said, yeah, let's go. And so I came out, and same thing, like I couldn't just send my rear end gears to somebody else. I couldn't send my transmissions in. I had to know how it all worked in my head. And my son Kyle was the exact same way. He wants to know every part that moves, why it moves, and what it does. So anyways, it was just, you know, I built stadium cars for the Unsers and learned a lot about those shocks, and, you know, and airbags that had airbags. I had my own stadium truck, you know, and anyways, when Custer came out with the 3-inch shock, it was harsh. It would absorb the big hits, the big G-outs. It was amazing. And they, you know, they didn't overheat. Anyways, compared to the small shock. So
The 2.5s and other stuff we had.
but the problem is you would come out and you would come out here and test, and I was the largest Custer dealer. I would order 20 shocks at a time. And people, when they started to discover them, would call Custer, Lance, who was the shop manager, and he said, well, it's going to take 6 or 8 weeks to get your shocks. And they said, well, we need them. We you know, we're going to build this. We're going to go to the Mint, or we're going to do this. We're building a new car.
Last name?
What?
What was
Lance
Lance's
King.
last name? Yeah.
Lance
Yep,
King.
Yep, that's where King
Brent's-
came from. Yep.
Brent's
dad.
dad. And he was a shop manager for Custer. And Custer, people that don't know, during the 80s and the 70s, when they were discovering all this oil all across the Middle East, he built a bomb, they called it. And he would drop it into an oil well that was drilled, and it was all mechanical. It registered temperature, it had a gyro, it had direction, and it was machined. You know, they were this big.
Like a torpedo,
Like a torpedo, but and then they would take it out on the cable, and they would read it, and they would know the direction the well was going, the temperatures, you know, the depth.
Wow.
And
I never knew that.
that's where it all came from, is because they machined the cylinders for
really?
oil wells.
I never knew that.
He was Custer was friends with Walker, and they loved the pre-run. He loved the pre-run. He went to Baja with Walker and rode with him and pre-ran with him forever. And Walker kept melting shocks, like everybody did back in the day. They would overheat, and that's when you had the shocks come through the hood of the Class 8s with quick pins.
Yeah,
And at the Mint, you'd run them for 2 laps, come into the pits, front and rear, swap them all out, and Walker had that rocker suspension because he just wasn't enough travel.
Yep.
So it was just constantly evolving. And so I was here and met Custer and saw the potential. And so I started buying the shocks, building cars, taking off the racks of 4 lightning rods or rough countries and putting on 2 Custer shocks. But you could never get it balanced right. And you'd change valving, and they had a clicker, and they had like -6 hoses or -8 hoses to the reservoirs, and and you would cook them.
With the 1-inch shaft or something, right?
It was a 3/4 inch.
Oh, 3/4, okay. They had a 7/8.
There was 7/8, and then it went to 1 inch.
Yeah.
But it was evolving, and the center was drilled so you could adjust it.
With the metering.
But in the meantime, Custer made so much money building in Long Beach these bombs to go down in the oil wells, and under the advice of his accountants, that money, is my understanding, and I might be wrong, got in trouble with the IRS, and they seized his company.
Oh, okay.
And Swayaway
Brian Skipper, yeah.
called me and said, Curt, what do you think? I said, as fast as you can build them, you can sell them. But you don't get Lance King, you're only buying hardware.
Oh, really? I did not know that you
I
were,
said,
yeah, I agree with that.
he's the key.
Yeah, okay.
And so, and they were very expensive. They were threaded. They were all threaded
Sure,
for
yeah.
coilovers.
That's difficult.
The OD, they had screw-together parts.
Yep.
The ends were screwed together. You know, you worked on them.
Sure.
And it was a lot of machining because
Right.
cost didn't matter when what they were building. So
With the bomb, it didn't matter, so they were
didn't
just using
matter.
parts similar to that and
they were
running the machine. Yeah.
30,000, 50,000, I've heard
okay.
100,000. They got more sophisticated, but it was all before electronics.
Yeah, yeah.
So Skipper buys it,
Yeah,
and Lance doesn't have a job.
right.
So to his credit, he knew it was too expensive, so he developed the snap ring seal
Sure,
caps.
yeah.
He just made it so they could be built at a profit. And the rest is history. Skipper ran it for a couple of years and realized it was a lot of work. And he's
Yeah.
a smart guy. He's a
Sure.
great
Oh,
engineer.
right, for sure.
Great
Yep.
engineer.
Yep.
Nothing wrong with anything he built, but you
Yeah,
just
hit Brian at all, no?
Yep.
Mhm.
He was just part of that evolution. So me being from Massachusetts, like I didn't know any of these people, so I didn't know all that history, but I was involved when it was going on. So I'm working with Mike Leslie, and we put coilovers on our Jeeps back then. We had
Yeah.
quarter elliptics.
Yeah.
Quarter elliptics, that's how far back we go.
Oh, yeah.
And people would buy these quarter elliptics from Long Beach Spring or National.
Uh-huh.
And they were $1,000 for a pair of leaf springs.
Wow, that was money back then, huh?
So they would buy them and say,
Yeah.
well, how do you mount them? And both of them would say, well, there's one guy, this guy Curt LeDuc, he makes a kit for $1,000, and it came with the adjusters, full-size prints, the jack and bolts from like a stock car,
Yeah, sure.
And I had fixtures, and we made them all out of chromoly, and I sold them forever. So we were in the quarter elliptic business. We made the rollers,
Everything.
everything. And because I didn't have enough sponsorship to race, I had to take what sponsorship I had, build parts, double my money,
To make money. Racing.
and then go racing. I never had another job.
So my saying is, it's cheaper to be a dealer than an addict. So you were an addict and a dealer both, because you were
Both.
supplying other people's addiction and you had one yourself. That's funny.
But how it helped the
Yeah.
sport was people were able to build these cars.
Yeah.
So I get involved with Mike Leslie, different story. But we'd come up testing here, Johnson Valley,
Sure.
Lucerne,
Yep.
and we'd spend 3 days, take the shocks off, pull the coils off, change the valving, came up with flutter stacks. We'd cut, I called them the Patriot cuts on the valving.
So the triangular.
You cut the
Yeah.
triangular
So that
ones.
more rebound, yeah.
Right, but it would make it react quicker.
For sure.
So we're doing all this stuff, and the cars got better, they got worse, and finally I said, man, I need to have it bypass at ride height,
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I'll just weld these tubes on here. So I took a 5/8 coarse thread bolt and machined it down and made some bodies. I had an old machinist guy, no CNC, none of that stuff.
So did you have your own lathe and you went out on the South Bend or something, or did you have somebody that you?
No, I had a guy out in Indio,
Okay.
Bill Plato, was an
Okay.
old-time machinist.
Right.
And he made them. And I would take the shock, drill a hole in it, weld it on, and go back out, and magic.
Yeah.
Magic happened. Because it would still catch it,
Yeah.
but it had that soft ride height.
Right,
The
so-
chatter bumps and just didn't fatigue you.
So much more energy under the curve that it felt like you had more travel and you didn't, because you used the optimal use of the travel available.
Right.
So yeah.
So then,
Yeah.
so in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I don't know anything about patents or hydraulics, but I knew I needed a check valve because I wanted to control the compression and the rebound.
Right.
And so I built one upside down and one right side up and made some longer and no check valves, but then I said, all right, I'm going to build some check valves. So exact same thing. So I start machining them, and they're aluminum. I had my own springs made. I knew a spring, a little almost like an ink pen spring,
Yeah, little spring.
right? Little tiny spring, and I had aluminum valves, and I had them hard anodized, and same thing, magic. Now in one day, I could do 2 weeks worth of tuning.
Right, because you don't have to pull the shock apart.
You got the spring rate right, and we came up with the dual rate springs. Used to have them, used to be progressively wound.
Which was dual rate, except for you didn't have any control of when
Right,
to wear, right?
when to
Yeah,
wear.
yeah.
So that was all part of that. You know, and now I see pictures of Mickey Thompson's old coilovers with, you know, bypasses on the inside, but no check valves. And,
Yes.
you know, Robbie Gordon's, you know, like the Fox shocks have for the Raptors with the sleeves,
Internal
with the
bypass thing,
internal
yeah.
bypass.
Check shim style, yeah.
And drill holes in them and use,
Yeah.
you know, but it was all evolving kind of at the same time. But me, as I needed to make money, so I put an ad in Dusty Times, bypass valves,
Dusty
set
Times, yeah.
$74 each. And I would take people pre-running. I would stay at Mike's and I would take Brian Collins, I would take the Deans, a ride in my truck coming down Simpsons into Valley T
Right.
the next morning
Yeah, yep.
with bypass valves, and they'd be like, what the heck is this? Robbie Gordon, same thing. He rode with me, he's like, this is amazing. And, you know, I had a F-150 truck. I built 5 of those, and I had my own, that was my pre-runner, pump gas, windshield. And so people would send me their shocks. They'd have to send me a diagram of where their ride height, bump, and droop was. And I would just weld them on. And so Lance King,
Did you have a formula?
no, but it was based,
Gestula?
yeah, but, yeah. I
You had a
just needed
formula,
to know where the piston was at ride height and
Perfect,
full
yeah,
bump.
Yeah.
And, you know, we never had the little ones, but then it's like I would sell people these shocks and with the bypasses on them, right? After and then they're like, which one's a rebound, which one's compression? I'm like, so they used to all be blue,
Oh,
right?
all right. Yeah,
So
yeah,
then
yeah,
I
yeah,
invented
yeah.
red for rebound because
Makes sense, right? Yeah.
we all now can look at a shock like this and go, okay,
Top one's
this
rebound,
one, yeah.
Yeah, but you didn't know back
Back
then.
then,
Yeah,
nobody
sure.
knew what they were.
That's
And
funny.
Curt had his internal bypass
With the
shocks.
welding rods and all that?
Yep.
I have about 4 sets of those in the shop.
I'm just saying, it was
Yeah.
evolving,
Yeah,
and
sure.
who was going to win,
Yeah.
nobody knew. But
Right.
Lance King, I swear, I said, Lance, we need to build some of these. And he said, Curt, nobody's ever going to pay $1,000 a piece for shock absorbers. And he was wrong.
Yeah, he was.
He was.
And he's learned he was wrong several times
Yeah.
over, I think.
So anyways,
that's
so
good.
that's some of my, and this is the way it evolved in my head, in my little shop, at my house.
So I kind of have, it's funny to me because you and I are the same, high school educated Imagineer, no real degree, no real thing, but you just, I'm pretty good at looking at something and say, well, I needed to do something different, and here's how I'm going to do it and do something, and I would just, sometimes I wish, I'm really happy that I was in the original progressive stages of Ultra 4 because it felt like the old days of desert racing. It was all that same thing. We had to figure out how to do both things at once, and I've done quite a bit of innovation in there, but I mean, I don't hold a candle to you. But so when you go tuning with somebody, like you and I have done a little bit of shock work together, not a ton, but a little bit, and when you go tuning with somebody and how do you tell them, how do you translate what you're feeling or in the car to what's happening and let somebody know what they're supposed to do? This is the question of the night. How do we do that?
So, well, for me, when somebody has a race car, I always say there's no bad race cars. They're just race cars people give up on. And I've never been a buggy guy, but I have worked with, with Butch Dean.
Sure.
And we were out testing with Butch when I first, I had to come up with small bypass tubes for Butch.
Yep.
And the buggy guys. Anyways, we're up in Vegas testing on his loop, and his son was there, and it's got piston valving and bypasses, and so I'm like, okay, this, and I'm just riding in the car, and I go, okay, this thing needs more compression, so we're just gonna double stack on the. He goes, well, this is as heavy as they make, and he comes out with a valving chart from Bilstein. And I look at it, and I threw it away. And his son and his guys went, oh my God, like you threw my dad's valving stack away? I go, yeah, like that's from the 70s.
Yeah.
Like, So anyway, so we double stacked it, like
Yeah.
now sometimes you have to.
Yeah.
And it was magic. And BJ Baldwin was driving for him at the time, and there was some magic that happened. And so when you talk about tuning, I ride with whoever I'm going to tune on,
Yeah,
and see how they drive, and then I can get a feel of what the car does.
Yeah.
And then I say, you see that right there? The back's packing.
Yeah,
You can feel it. It's staying up. We need to let it out. We need to open up, and mine were coarse thread. So one turn of my bypass valves, you could feel.
Sure.
None of this quarter turn crap. It was like, okay, we're going the right way or the wrong way.
Yeah, so put a bracket on it and figure out which
Right.
is
And
then
then,
in the middle somewhere.
and if you have found too over time, you get the front where it's happy, and then you're like, all right, we got to fix the back.
Now the back's
As
out.
soon as then you're like, oh, we can make the front better.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. If the guy can't drive it, like Robbie Gordon or Rob McCaffrey,
Right.
there's no sense in tuning it for him
For sure.
for that level. Next year, once you've got a year under your belt, come back and we'll go back to Barstow. We'll come back to Lucerne. We'll go to Prim, and sometimes you've found it too. You just find that magic combination.
Oh, sometimes.
You think you're like I'll wake up in the morning, I got to move the dual rate nuts up.
Right.
Sometimes it's just that simple.
And it's an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch sometimes.
Sometimes, but
Sometimes,
usually
but
it's
rarely.
more.
Yeah, I agree, but sometimes it's like nothing makes a huge difference.
And then, so when it's all said and done, with Nick Vanderway, I've tested a lot with Riviera.
Yeah.
I drive,
Sure.
and they just go. They have no idea what the car can do.
You see
Right,
it
and
sometimes.
so you show them what the car can do, and they just go, how did you know I would do that? Because you're testing in the same bump. So I was lucky because I had so many customers, it sped up my at this place, TVs, the trophy trucks, the same bumps, you see how they react to it.
Yeah.
And now you're teaching him, the owner of the car or the guy that's going to drive it, that this is what it needs. And Kyle, my son Kyle, was even more sensitive than me. He was like, the back's packing on my trophy truck, my geyser truck. And that truck, I have ADS shocks, and they're 5 1/4.
Yeah, the big ones, right.
5 1/4. I said, I want them the size of a Folgers coffee tin.
You got it.
I got them.
Yeah.
And Kyle drove it.
I wish they'd have made the piston a little bit flow a little bit better, but
Your thumb fits in, my thumb fits in the valving hole.
I know.
But I was part of the evolution of 3 to 3.5 to 4 to 4.5. And every car you put them on got faster.
Right.
Initially was faster before you even tuned it.
So I had a thought, but I can't remember what the thought is, so we need to keep talking here. I do the same thing when we get here. Like today, I had 5 cars here, and I rode with 5 different cars, and it's pretty easy. And it's not pretty easy. You can go out and you can tell the guy's speed, and sometimes the speed isn't up to par. So you basically just do 3 or 4 laps to get him up to speed and give him some coaching. And you don't have to drive right down the middle of the biggest hole. You can move over 12 inches and miss that.
I told my son Kyle, move over. He's like, this is a trophy truck.
Yeah, but
right down the middle.
I'm fine with that, except for why?
Why? That's what I said.
If you can hit that much smaller hole, you're that much more comfortable on the next bump or whatever. Why wouldn't you? But I understand what he's saying. But I just think that I would rather find little nuggets of traction and smooth any chance you get, because there's enough.
But that's part of teaching them.
Yeah.
It is.
So we call those guys moving targets, because they come here just wide-eyed and I don't know what's going on, and hopefully by the end of the day they're going better, and then they can go out and learn, and that's what we do.
Go pre-run, get some seat time, and start to trust. You have to trust the car. Well, and I always say there's every car has something it doesn't like, right?
Sure.
It's either a G out or a rain rut or whatever. There's something you're always looking for.
So
the only car I drove was the Riviera truck that it didn't matter.
Really?
Back when Jim Blackmore prepped it, and I raced with Mark.
I've worked a lot with Jim.
And, I'm telling you, that car was magic. And the first time Kyle drove it, qualified it at, to start on the pole at the 1,000. he saw Robbie Gordon. He goes, "You cheating bastard! You had that in the '80s." Robbie's like, "I did."
I think that was for the 500, wasn't it?
Kyle, no, he started the 1,000.
I thought it was the 500 because
No.
he qualified.
No, he qualified on the pole for the 1,000.
Wow.
Well, they thought Mark Post was going to qualify it.
Oh, okay.
It was at SEMA,
I see,
at
yeah.
the short track
Uh-huh.
in Vegas. So they
remember, yep.
let Mark go early. He was the first car, I think, and Kyle put it on the pole.
Yeah.
And even, Kyle went to Best in the Desert, and I got to talk about Kyle, and I feel all the hugs from everybody here.
Yeah, please, no.
It's good to be around friends, I can tell you that.
Yes.
But Kyle went to Parker, and he puts it on the pole in qualifying, and a couple of guys came up and says, "Son of a bitch, I finally beat McCachran, and you show up." But the qualifying at Parker was first time Kyle, we had tested it a bunch, but his first race with it at the October race, the short race.
Right.
And Parker Challenge. Anyways, Kyle goes out, goes into the very first turn, completely wrong, dives it down the middle, and I just say, I'm riding with him, because you have to have two people. And I said, really? And he hits the berm. You drive straight. He doesn't try to drive the outside. He just straight into it, turns it. The car sucked it up. It was amazing. As soon as it come out of the corner, he goes like this, pulls his helmet off, right? Unplugs me.
Oh.
So this is the practice lap. So we do this whole practice lap, right? And we come back and he plugs it in. He goes, "That's it. You're not riding." I go, "Well, I have to." He goes, "No, I'm not gonna. You're not gonna ride with me." And I said, "Well, you have to have two people in the car. I'm the only one here with a band. Like, yeah, I have to." And he's like, "No, I'd rather go by myself." And I said, "I'll tell you what. I won't say a word till the roof hits the dirt." This is me and Kyle. My trophy truck our trophy truck.
Yeah, sure.
And he's like, "Okay." So sure enough, we go out, we go around the corner, he does it right. The very first corner, so he runs it like everybody else.
Yep.
Comes around, gets to the finish, he goes, "What do you think?" I go, "I think definitely top 3. He's like, "Really?" I go, "Yeah." And I go, and so we're driving back to the pits, and I go, "Nice bicycle." And he's like, "Which one?" I go, "All of them." But he's like, "Can we open up the rebound? It's just packing just a little bit." I'm like, "Yep, we will."
Yeah.
Anyways, and so
he's just a great mind.
he qualified. He qualified on the pole.
Yeah.
Anyways, and then I think the underdrive broke.
5-cent part, right? That's not a 5-cent part.
Well.
But so often a 5-cent part takes you out of a race where you're winning. So I don't know if you want to talk about Kyle, or if you want to talk about Kyle. I'm just going to tell you, it was just a pleasure, and he's such a loss, and we miss him, and we wish you the best, and if there's anything you need.
I know. And, the sport's been amazing. So,
Yeah.
Kyle and his wife Amber want the kids to race trophy carts. So hopefully Grandpa's got a job for the summer. I told her I can drive the toter home. And so we're working through it. Okay. I want to have a celebration of life for Kyle.
Yeah.
And but when Amber's ready, and she may never be ready, but
She doesn't need to, but if she is, we're all
Yeah, I
there
know.
for her.
I
and
know.
for her,
So
and you and
it's all
everyone.
good.
So
It's
thanks,
all good.
Thanks for talking about that. But
But
he was.
the shock thing, and Kyle was around as we developed this. And a friend of mine works for Proline, Tim Clark. He was part of me coming up with the check valves. And
Right.
so my check valves are round,
Yes.
right? And everybody else builds them flat. It's back to the shock thing. So finally one day, Brett King calls me and he goes, "Hey, Curt, I want to buy one rebound and one compression." And I said, "Brett, if you're going to steal it, you're going to buy 10. He's like, "Yeah, but I only need 2. Nope, 10. And, the late John Marking, same thing.
You used to buy them from me.
Same deal. He called me up. I go, "Well, I want one of each." I said, "You're going to do the same thing as King. You're going to buy 10.
I have a story about that.
But he was smart enough to patent things and make royalties, right?
Yeah. Yeah, John was just.
He was a smart guy.
Fox has the ability to push patents, and there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah. What's your story with John and
So
bypasses?
it's not John, it's Fox and Bypass, but I worked there for a couple of years,
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were moving during that thing, and there was a box of these odd-looking bypass parts. And the guy said, "What are these?" I'm like, "You don't know what those are?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't know what they are." And they wanted to throw them in the trash. I'm like, "Just put them in that gray pickup right over there. It's all good." So they gave them to, they said, "You can have them. We're throwing them away." So you can have them. And now we have one of my employees sitting over there watching us right now. And my employees have said, "What are these? We've never seen them before." And I said, "Look, that's just history. You just leave those where they are."
But I had double O-rings in them.
Yeah.
And because they were aluminum with very small springs, they reacted quickly.
Yeah.
And everybody else made heavy springs and flat tappets. So the oil comes in flat and goes that way.
Yeah.
So my thing was, I'm just controlling the size of the hole,
Right.
but it's a light spring. And that's what the rock crawlers needed light springs.
The lightest spring you can get all the
And
time.
I've actually done some rock crawlers where I don't even put a spring in it.
There's a lot of cars out there with no springs in them.
Is that really? I wasn't the first guy to do that?
You were probably before me, but there's a lot of guys
Yeah,
out there with
because
that spring.
it doesn't have the weight that a big truck has.
Right, that's not the inertia, but
Right.
then and as soon as the flow reverses, they're going to close.
Right.
They're a little louder that way, but your rounded nose has a hydraulic cushion and makes it not slap like a King flat tappet does.
Yeah.
The flat tappet slaps a lot. Sometimes you get in a King truck. Nothing. I love King, but I'm
you
just
can
saying,
hear them.
You're going to hear them.
It's annoying in a
Yeah,
pre-run.
and then the Fox has the nose on it, and that causes that similar, not exactly the same as round, but that similar hydraulic cushion, and so they don't slap so loud.
So then I started making the check valves out of titanium. But the aluminum ones, hard anodized, eventually would wear after a couple of years. But one of the biggest compliments for me was Nye Frank.
Love Nye.
Smart guy.
Oh, yeah.
He's done all kinds of racing.
Have you seen that fire pit out there?
Yeah.
Some Nye Frank air shocks on that. I didn't do it, but they're there, and I just love them.
He called me up, and for McCachran's short course truck, he
Yes.
bought valves for me.
Oh, really?
And it was like that's one of those magic moments. You think,
Yeah.
Nye Frank, the
Yeah,
guy
Nye
that
Frank.
had invented all this stuff, worked for Mickey, land speed record holders.
Like that's
Like it's just he
no
was
royalty,
amazing.
but that's royalty of royalty.
It is.
Yeah,
No, he
Nye
was.
Frank, he was amazing.
He built
Yeah.
titanium bodies for
Yeah.
dragsters.
Yeah.
And he was close to me. He was in Idlewild.
Right.
I was across the canyon.
You're in Beaumont, those
Cherry
times?
Cherry Valley.
Cherry Valley. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the shop is 10 feet from my house.
Yeah,
And that's where we built everything. And people come into my shop, and they're like, "Where'd you build the cars?" Because I don't have a surface plate. Never had one.
no, really.
I just built them on a slab. And then I say, well, they said, "How'd you build them?" I said, "We measured everything from the ceiling." And to a fault, everybody goes, like they think there'd be marks up there or something. They all look up like, no, like I don't care. It's an off-road car. It could be off a quarter inch. It's not gonna go around Crandon wrong.
So we've said, I've said that before, that because I was involved with a car that was built on and it was built on a jig. They this particular builder built a lot of cars, kind of by hand by that, and then they built one they got a real fixture and they fixtured it up instead of just a surface plate and tacked it together and then built it, and nothing ever fit exactly right. So this same builder finally gets a fixture and they build it, and we go out and we go one loop around Barstow or one loop around wherever we were testing, and then we measure them, and there's not a thing within an eighth of where it was when we started that day.
Really?
Just because all that welding,
It moved.
everything more normalizes and
Normalized.
relaxes and gets so I just think that, and then same truck we measured several other times just to see, and it was always different. It's just, and no crashes either, just driving it. It just
Move.
There's so much of force, like hitting a bump stop harder, hitting a G out harder, just the force of all that multiple flexing, because chassis flex more than people think, right?
Wow.
Yeah, so
So short course cars, I built one for McCachran,
Yeah.
which was the ortho
Yeah.
truck. I built one for Schluter, that Scott Douglas and
Yeah,
I both raced. I won the Borgorner with it. I built one for Gerald Foster, a guy from the Midwest. I built one for myself. I built one for Mike Leslie. All four-wheel drive trucks, 5 of them. And one year at Crandon, there was a problem. All my trucks were running 1st through 5th, but the problem was I was 3rd.
you can't do that. That says something about your character, but maybe not your brains.
No, but I'm just saying, it was like,
Yeah.
I was just like, I'm counting and watching cars in front of me. I'm like, damn it.
He did too well on his, huh?
Anyways, I've had, I've won a lot of races that a lot of people haven't in a trophy truck championship with Donovan, and it just the history is what makes it special.
Yeah, the stories.
Yeah,
So,
like you came not from our sport, but you came into it and found a way to make a living at it.
Yeah.
And have happy customers, and just don't worry about it.
Yeah, so
just run it.
I did a bunch of racing early, but I was like you. I had to learn because I got married with kids pretty early, and so I didn't have. Sometimes I had to choose between diapers and race gas, and often I made that choice wrong. So, and my wife will tell you to this day how many times I made it wrong. But God love her, she lets me do what I do. Doesn't let me. She supports what I do. And second thing, I just always wanted to do it myself. I always just had this drive to let me fix it. I think I can fix it better. I think I'm the kind of guy that goes golfing, and then if I mill this driver just a little different, it will go farther. It's all bullshit, but that's the way I think. So speaking of stories, story time with Curt. Do you have one you can give us? Now I only have about 4 hours on this card, so not all of them, but just one story. My favorite that I think I've heard recently is one of the Dakar stories about finding welding rod or finding a guy with a welder but no welding rod.
Yeah, there's, when I started, going to events, Moab with Skyjacker, I'm guilty of telling a story. And Mr. McCurry, who owns Skyjacker, based out of Louisiana, longtime mud racer, raced off-road, great guy, celebrating their 50th anniversary. Thank you, Skyjacker. For sure. And they're sponsoring my grandsons for the last couple of years. But he said, Curt, I see you're a storyteller. And this was at Moab. On those runs, and you've been to Moab, it's go and drive and stand around and talk and go to dinner and talk. I said, Mr. McCurry, even in our sport, they're going to say, oh, I was in Moab and I met Curt LeDuc, and I said, I want them to have a story. I don't want them to say, oh, yeah, he was great. Or, I want them to say, oh, he had this story about Dakar or about Baja or about Pikes Peak or Crandon or whatever. But because I'm only going to meet him once in my life, then I want him to have a story. And he's like, understand. He didn't understand it till I explained it to him.
Well, I understand.
But that's me. Like me. I like it. I tell people the Dakar when I went to Africa makes the Baja 1000 look like a go-kart race in a Walmart parking lot in your hometown.
Really?
You're in Africa. You can't borrow anything. Nobody hardly speaks your language. You're in terrain you've never seen with a team you've never seen. The trucks and support, and it just, when I went, I raced it 4 years. It was like, it's amazing, and it's just. I don't even talk about the racing. It's like the first time you're driving across the Sahara Desert and there's a camel, like you're in a race. It doesn't matter. You just do just like this big circle. No, you just do this big circle. Like that's a camel. And like when you get into Black Africa, like Burkina Faso, and I've been paid to drive off-road in 14 countries. 14 countries. Like that's, I started putting it in my phone in my notes, like building race cars, like who did I build? And part of teams. I didn't build all those cars myself. Sure. I was part of teams with Mark Leslie, stadium trucks, with Walker. Like it didn't matter, but I was just a piece of it. Some of them came out of my shop, like Broncos. Now they're cool, right? The big Broncos. I built 10. Yeah. I built Wilsons. I built Baldwins. Because I had to make money, because that allowed me to have better employees. I could get better fabricators. I could get more people because I always had work. It wasn't just racing, and it allowed me to make a little bit of money to keep my racing going, Yeah. Anyways, the first time you're in Black Africa and a pack of monkeys runs across the fucking road, road in front of you, you're like, that was monkeys. you know, and
Yeah.
my favorite Dakar story was for Y2K, when the world was going to come to the end,
Right.
when computers were going to crash. Darren Skilton had a deal to go race Kia, and I had built the Kias that had won the 1,000, and you know, Clive Skilton, my sponsor, had bought a franchise, and he's like, he calls me up 6 weeks before the Dakar. He's like, Curt, I'm worried about my son. I don't want him to go by himself. I'll fund it if you build a car. And I had all the patterns. Back then, we had no laser cutters.
Yeah.
So we had a paper pattern and a bandsaw. And one guy would sit there all day and make parts.
A year ago, I watched you build an axle for a big manufacturer that way, but okay, keep going.
Yeah. So anyways, I said, all right, I'll build it. So we got it done. Kyle had just got his driver's license. We got the cars finished, tested them. Troy Johnson from the Fab School I gave him his first job in off-road. Troy's a great guy. He's helped me my whole life.
Sure.
He's been
Yep.
good to me.
Love Troy.
Crew chief. He's ridden with me. He's a great guy.
I got a couple of Fab School guys working for me. I like that program.
Yeah, so I support it. Anyway, so we get the cars done. He finished one car. I said, Troy, just build me the fuel cell, and I'll build the rest of the car. Get the car done, stickered, painted, wrapped, and we have to drive them to LAX to put them on an Air France plane to fly them, because you have to get them into Paris before customs closes. They close before Christmas. The race starts New Year's Day in Paris, tech inspection and all that. So Kyle and I are driving on the brand new 105 freeway. It just opened, and we're in traffic, and he's like, he beeps the horn and gets me to pull over. He's like, Dad. I go, what's the matter? He's like, Dad, when we're going slow in traffic like this, there's this red light on the dash that flashes. I said, oh, that's low oil pressure. Just put it in neutral, because they're licensed. They're totally street legal. They have to be. And I said, just rev it up a little. So we get him to get him to the airport and put him on a air transport plane. And my wife followed us in our Jeep Cherokee, which we got from Donaby. And I built so many stock vehicles. I built trophy trucks. Just the gauntlet, Class 8s and Jeeps, and anyways.
Solid axle stuff before us rock crawlers existed, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Way before. And somebody asked me today about rock crawling, because I went to Farmington. Skyjacker wanted me to go rock crawling, and went to Moab. I've been to a couple of them out here.
Sure.
I'm undefeated in my rock crawling career. Rich Klein did an event in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Matt, who owned AGR Steering out of Texas, he's like, Curt, I want you to drive my Jeep in Pennsylvania. So I flew. He drove the car there, broke some stuff. And the last day, I got a minus 27. I took all the bonus lines and so I have the plaque. I think it was U-Rock, and I'm undefeated in my one competition rock crawling. And the King of the Hammers, I came twice.
Yep.
But didn't finish. It was Todd's car out of Phoenix, but it was great. I wanted to just experience it, and I did. So
Well, I'm sitting here looking at your mic battery light flashing, so it's about time to wrap it up. But I do have a question for you.
go ahead.
Have you ever driven a shock with grease in it instead of oil?
Yes, I have.
Curt LeDuc, thank you very much. I appreciate the
That's
time.
for the next episode.
Yeah,
We'll
there you
talk
go.
about the grease.
Okay. We're recording. I'll see if it looks good,
Got two cameras?
just in case I screw it up and it doesn't work. All right. You ready?
Ready. And you put the grease in the reservoir and then charge the reservoir.
I hate to say this, but the grease is better than the oil, sir.
All right, we good? We covered everything?
I think so.
I mean, am I supposed to look at the camera or
I don't
you?
care who you look. I looked at you.